Before we begin, I must state clearly that the story you are about to hear is a meticulous reconstruction of events, pieced together from court testimonies, FBI files, declassified documents, interviews, and journalistic accounts. Its sole purpose is to present a complete and accurate narrative for educational and historical understanding. The world of organized crime is a dark maze of half-truths and silenced witnesses, but this is an attempt to follow the trail of facts to its chilling, ambiguous end. So, if you are ready for a story that is stranger and more sinister than any fiction, a tale where a nervous man in a wig shop became the linchpin for a legendary crime and then vanished from the face of the earth, then listen closely. This is not a bedtime story to lull you to sleep, but a true crime chronicle to keep you awake in the dark. And if you find these deep dives into forgotten chapters of history compelling, remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, as it is the only way to ensure you don't miss the next unsettling story from the shadows. Marty Krugman was never supposed to be part of the underworld. He existed on its outermost, least glamorous fringe, a man whose life was a portrait of mundane anxiety and small-time dreams. In the sprawling, brutal ecosystem of organized crime in 1970s New York, where made men carried an aura of feared respect and hitmen operated with chilling detachment, Krugman was merely a peripheral creature, a nervous fish swimming in the murky waters around the true sharks. He wasn't a killer, his hands were not stained with blood, and the thought of violence likely sent a jolt of his characteristic nervous energy through his slight frame. He wasn't a boss, he commanded no soldiers, gave no orders that carried the weight of life and death. He wasn't even a made guy, that elusive, blood-bound status within the mafia that promised a form of twisted honor and protection. No, Marty Krugman was a jittery Brooklyn bookmaker who happened to run a wig shop, a man whose path was one of minor league hustles and quiet desperation, a world away from the epic heists and underworld legends. His domain was not the backrooms of social clubs or the hushed, elegant restaurants where dons held court. It was the unassuming storefront of the Hairpiece on 86th Street in Bay Ridge, a place where women experiencing hair loss could find a semblance of normalcy, and where, behind a curtain or in a back office, bets were placed on basketball games, horse races, and football spreads. This duality defined him, a public purveyor of vanity and concealment, and a private trader in odds and chance. He was a talker, a man whose nerves seemed to translate into a constant stream of words, ideas, and schemes. He had the fast-talking patter of a born salesman, which served him well in both the wig and gambling trades. But in the company of the hardened men he aspired to impress, this verbosity often came off as just that, nervous chatter. He saw the mafia not as a criminal brotherhood but as a potential client base, a network of high rollers who could bring him better action. He cultivated these connections carefully, always the supplicant, always the eager helper. He ran errands, placed bets for the wise guys, offered credit, and listened. He was a sponge for information, a collector of gossip and loose talk, believing that in this economy of secrets, he could trade upward. His life was a precarious balancing act of modest profits, lingering debts, and the constant, low-grade fear of being caught between the law and the whims of his more dangerous clients. He lived in a middle-class home in Sheepshead Bay with his wife, Francine, and their daughter, trying to maintain a veneer of suburban normalcy that grew thinner with every whispered phone call and every late-night visitor. Marty Krugman, in essence, was a man looking for a score, a way out of the financial tightrope walk that was his existence. He wanted to be a player, or at least be seen as useful to the players, not understanding that in the world he was courting, usefulness had a finite and often fatal shelf life. He was a creature of the grey areas, operating in the penumbra cast by far more powerful and dangerous men, mistaking his proximity to them for inclusion, his overheard secrets for currency. This was his reality, a life of small calculations and big worries, forever on the outside looking in, dreaming of the one deal, the one piece of information that would change his fortunes. He could not have known that the change would not be one of fortune, but of fate, and that the very secret he would stumble upon, a secret about a seemingly impregnable fortress of money, would become a kind of poison, a radioactive piece of knowledge that would first promise him the world and then systematically dismantle his life. His ordinary vulnerabilities, his hunger for recognition, and his place on the fringe made him the perfect catalyst and, ultimately, the perfect victim. The stage was set not in a grand underworld summit, but in the cramped, aromatic confines of a wig shop, where a nervous man with big ears and a desperate ambition would hear a whisper that would echo into infamy and then into silence. The whisper that forever altered the trajectory of Marty Krugman's life, and indeed the annals of American crime, did not arrive with dramatic fanfare. It came through the most mundane of channels, the gossip and loose talk of his clients, the very currency he traded in. In the summer of 1978, Krugman was doing what he always did, running his wig shop, taking bets, and keeping his ears open. Among his regular betting clients was a man named Louis Werner, a disgruntled cargo agent for Lufthansa German Airlines at John F. Kennedy International Airport. Werner was deep in debt to the mob, owing money to a bookie connected to the powerful Lutchie's crime family. Desperate and drowning, Werner began to vent, to complain, and in doing so, he began to paint a picture. He spoke of his workplace, the Lufthansa cargo building at JFK's Building 261, not as a logistical hub, but as a fortress of unimaginable, almost mythical, wealth. He described the regular, weekly shipments of untraceable US currency, being flown back to Germany from American military bases and other sources. He detailed the procedures, the schedules, the security flaws that were invisible to outsiders but glaringly obvious to a resentful insider. He talked of the midnight shift, the quiet period where the vast, hangar-like space was minimally staffed, and where millions in cash sat, bundled and stored, awaiting transport. This wasn't just money. It was, as it would later be famously described, a mountain of money. For Werner, it was just bitter shop talk, the grumblings of a man trapped in a job he resented, surrounded by wealth he couldn't touch. But for Marty Krugman, the perennial opportunist with a scheming mind, it was a blueprint. He heard not just a complaint, but a symphony of possibility. His nervous energy, usually a source of irritation to the more stoic wise guys, now found a singular, electrifying focus. He understood immediately that this information was too big, too hot, for him to handle alone. He needed to pass it up the food chain, to trade this secret for a seat at the table. And so, he took this explosive gossip to the one man he believed could make it happen, James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke. Burke was a whole different category of criminal. A feared associate of the Lutchie's family based out of Robert's Lounge in Howard Beach, Queens, Burke was a legend in the underworld, a prolific hijacker, a ruthless enforcer, and a man whose capacity for violence was the stuff of nightmares. Where Krugman jittered, Burke exuded a calm, terrifying menace. This was the man Krugman chose as his audience. In a moment that would seal his destiny, Krugman laid out Werner's detailed schematics of the Lufthansa vault to Jimmy Burke. He presented it as the ultimate score, a heist that would dwarf anything ever attempted. Burke, a connoisseur of large-scale theft, listened. He saw the potential instantly, but he also saw Krugman for what he was, a useful leak, not a partner. The plan was set in motion, but Marty's role transformed in that instant from discoverer to liability. He had delivered the golden egg, but the goose, Louis Werner, and the intricate planning belonged to Burke's world now. Krugman was assured he would be taken care of, that his finder's fee would be substantial, a life-changing sum. He was asked to keep Werner calm, to keep him on the hook, and to provide any further logistical details that might trickle out. For Marty, those promises were a dream coming true. He saw visions of paying off his debts, of buying his family security, of finally being respected. He buzzed with the anticipation of it, his nervous chatter now laced with the pride of a co-architect. He didn't see the cold calculus in Burke's eyes. In Burke's world, loose ends were not tolerated, and Marty Krugman, with his nervous temperament, his non-Italian blood, and his big mouth, was the loosest of ends imaginable. He was a civilian who now held catastrophic knowledge. The planning for the heist, a masterpiece of criminal logistics involving inside information, fake IDs, stolen trucks, and a crew of seasoned professionals, proceeded with military precision throughout the fall of 1978. And Marty, on the periphery, believed he was part of it. He waited for his payday, his moment of validation, utterly unaware that in the eyes of the men executing the plan, he had already served his only purpose. On the cold, early morning of December 11th, 1978, the heist was executed with a brutal efficiency that would later astonish law enforcement. Masked men, armed with rifles and walkie-talkies, subdued the Lufthansa cargo workers, including the hapless Louis Werner who was, cruelly, forced to be present. In just under an hour, they vanished into the pre-dawn darkness with approximately $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewelry. A haul worth over $20 million in today's money, making it the largest cash robbery in American history. It was clean, it was quiet, and it was perfect. And back in Brooklyn, Marty Krugman waited. The score of a lifetime was in, and he was ready for his share. The aftermath of the Lufthansa heist was not the triumphant windfall Marty Krugman had envisioned. It was the beginning of a suffocating descent into a paranoia so profound it would become his new reality. In the immediate days following the robbery, a stunned silence fell over the criminal world, quickly followed by an uncontrollable, feverish greed. The sheer scale of the haul was its own kind of poison. It was too much money, too much temptation, and it instantly corrupted the very bonds of loyalty and silence that were supposed to govern the underworld. For Jimmy Burke and his inner circle, the mountain of cash presented an existential problem. Every person who knew about the heist was now a potential federal witness or a rival claimant. The solution, in Burke's ruthless lexicon, was not distribution, but elimination. And at the top of that list stood the two weakest, most vulnerable links: the inside man, Louis Werner, and the man who had brought him the blueprint, Marty Krugman. Werner was dealt with swiftly. He was foolish enough to brag about his involvement, was quickly identified by the FBI, and would later be convicted and sentenced. But for Marty, a more insidious and terrifying fate unfolded. He did not receive a visit from men with guns, not at first. Instead, he was met with a wall of evasion, lies, and gaslighting. When he approached Jimmy Burke or any of the associates, asking about his share, he was met with blank stares, dismissive laughs, or patronizing assurances. "What money, Marty? You're seeing things. It wasn't us. You've been listening to fairy tales." This was a tactic far crueler than a simple bullet. It was psychological torture, designed to make him doubt his own sanity, to question the very reality he knew to be true. He had been in the room, he had delivered the information, he had helped keep Werner compliant. He had seen the planning, felt the electric anticipation. And now, he was being told it never happened, that he was a delusional nuisance. The nervous energy that once fueled his scheming now curdled into a constant, trembling anxiety. He couldn't sleep. He jumped at shadows. He began to talk, not with his earlier boastful pride, but with a desperate, pleading insistence. He told his wife, Francine, everything. He told a few trusted friends. He started keeping notes, a frantic, handwritten ledger of what he was owed, of the conversations he'd had, names, dates, amounts, a diary of his own doom. He became a walking, talking liability, exactly as Burke had foreseen. But he wasn't just talking to friends. In his desperation, he made a catastrophic error. He began to whisper to the wrong people, to associates on the fringes of other crews, complaining about being stiffed by Jimmy Burke. This was the ultimate sin in the underworld, airing dirty laundry, showing disrespect, and inviting outside scrutiny. Each whispered complaint was a death sentence being slowly ratified. The world around Krugman began to grow cold. Old acquaintances crossed the street to avoid him. The phone in his wig shop rang less often. He felt the isolation closing in, a tangible chill in the air wherever he went. He knew, on a primal level, what this meant. The calm, methodical narrator of this story must emphasize the excruciating slowness of this downfall. This wasn't a sudden arrest or a dramatic shootout. It was the slow tightening of a noose, knot by psychological knot. Marty tried to fight back in the only way he knew how, with more talk. He made veiled threats, suggesting that if he wasn't paid, people would find out. He didn't understand that he was not negotiating. He was merely accelerating the timeline for his own execution. The FBI, meanwhile, was in a frenzy. The audacity and scale of the Lufthansa heist had humiliated them, and they turned the full force of their investigation on the known haunts of Jimmy Burke and his associates. They heard whispers of a nervous bookmaker, a wig shop owner, who was telling stories. They began to circle Marty Krugman, seeing him as the most likely candidate to crack under pressure and flip. For Marty, this should have been a lifeline, a chance to enter witness protection and save himself and his family. But the code of the streets, or perhaps a final, fatal flicker of hope that the money would materialize, kept him from walking into a federal building. Or maybe it was the pervasive, well-founded fear that Burke's reach was so long, the law could not protect him. So he remained trapped in a nightmare of his own making, caught between the immovable object of Jimmy Burke's murderous intent and the irresistible force of the FBI's investigation. His physical health began to deteriorate under the strain. The man who once buzzed with scheming energy became a gaunt, pale specter, his eyes hollow with dread. He was a ghost haunting his own life, waiting for an end he could see coming from a mile away but felt powerless to avoid. The cash from the heist, the very object of his desire, had become a phantom that haunted him, a treasure that brought not a single moment of peace, only an endless stretch of terror. The downfall of Marty Krugman was not marked by a single event, but by this agonizing, protracted erosion of his mind, his spirit, and his very will to live, all while the cold eyes of predators watched and waited for the perfect moment to strike. The final act of Marty Krugman's story is shrouded in a silence so complete it speaks louder than any courtroom testimony ever could. It is a void, a negative space in the historical record that screams of finality and professional brutality. By late January 1979, the pressure had reached a breaking point. The FBI was closing in, conducting overt surveillance, making their interest in Krugman unmistakably clear. This public scrutiny made Marty not just a liability, but a ticking time bomb for Jimmy Burke. The decision, which had likely been made the moment Krugman first asked for his share, now required immediate execution. On the evening of January 28, 1979, Marty Krugman told his wife, Francine, that he was going out to meet someone who might finally be ready to settle the debt, to give him the money he was owed. He was hopeful, she would later recall, a flicker of his old self returning at the prospect of a resolution. He got into a car, driven by a trusted associate, or so he believed, and vanished from the face of the earth. He was never seen again by any family member, friend, or federal agent. No body was ever found. No forensic evidence ever surfaced. No witness ever came forward with a definitive account of his last moments. His disappearance was an act of chilling perfection, a masterpiece of criminal disposal that has defied resolution for over 4 decades. The official investigation, for all its resources, hit a wall of omerta so absolute it was like trying to grasp smoke. The FBI had theories, of course. Based on informant whispers and the known patterns of Jimmy Burke's crew, the prevailing belief is that Krugman was lured to a secluded location, a warehouse, a house under construction, a remote stretch of Long Island marshland. There, he would have been confronted not with a bag of money, but with the grim reality of his situation. His execution would have been quick, professional, and utterly merciless. The disposal of the body would have been handled with the same cold efficiency as the heist itself. Buried in a construction site where concrete was about to be poured, dismembered, and scattered across multiple landfills, or weighted down and sunk in the deep, anonymous waters off the coast. The goal was not just to kill Marty Krugman, but to erase him, to ensure that not a single physical trace remained that could ever be presented in a court of law. In this, the killers succeeded spectacularly. The aftermath of his vanishing was a study in terrified silence and dead ends. Francine Krugman, after a period of frantic searching, reported him missing. The FBI, knowing exactly what had happened but utterly unable to prove it, interviewed Burke and his associates repeatedly. They were met with shrugs, smirks, and feigned concern. Marty, that nervous guy? He probably ran off with some broad. He owed money everywhere. The story was consistent, insulting, and legally impregnable. Without a body, without a crime scene, without a witness, there could be no murder charge. The Lufthansa heist itself remained officially unsolved for years in terms of convictions, a cascade of dead or missing witnesses ensuring that the cash was never recovered and the masterminds walked free for a long time. Marty Krugman became a permanent open file, a ghost in the FBI's ledger, and a cautionary tale whispered in the streets. His fate was the dark, logical conclusion of the world he had tried to infiltrate. He had mistaken access for alliance, information for power. He believed his cleverness could buy him a place at the table, not understanding that in the world of Jimmy Burke, the table was often a place where you were served your last meal. His entire arc, from the eager hustler in the wig shop, to the proud informant with a secret, to the desperate, pleading ghost, to the vanished man, is a perfect parable of the outsider consumed by the machine he sought to exploit. The mountain of money he helped uncover did not buy him a better life. It purchased only the services of his own exterminators. His story leaves us with haunting, unanswerable questions that linger in the air long after the telling. What were his final thoughts in that car, when the hope turned to horror? Did he realize, in a final, clear moment, the terrible cost of his ambition? The silence that surrounds his end is the most eloquent part of the narrative. It is the sound of the underworld closing ranks, of justice denied, of a life dissolved into nothingness. It is a testament to the fact that the most frightening crimes are not always the ones we see, but the ones that leave no trace at all, vanishing as completely as a man erased from his own life, leaving behind only a family's grief, a detective's frustration, and the heavy, unsettling knowledge that sometimes the monsters win, and they do so without leaving a single clue behind. The legacy of Marty Krugman and the Lufthansa Heist extends far beyond the vanished man and the unrecovered money, seeping into the bedrock of American crime law and reshaping both the tactics of law enforcement and the mythology of the mob itself. In the years that followed the heist and Krugman's disappearance, a slow-motion implosion began within Jimmy Burke's crew, a self-destruction fueled by the very paranoia and greed that had sealed Krugman's fate. Burke, convinced that anyone who knew about the robbery was a threat, embarked on a near-genocidal purge of his own associates. A grim parade of bodies began to surface, or more often, not surface. Tommy D. Simone, a volatile and violent participant, vanished. Joe Buddha Manry and Robert Frenchy McMahon, two other key players, were found executed. Angelo Sepe, Paolo Licastri, and others linked to the crew met brutal ends. The mountain of cash, rather than securing loyalties, had acted as a corrosive agent, dissolving them. It was a textbook example of how too much success could be a criminal enterprise's ultimate undoing, attracting not fortune but a fatal curse. The FBI, initially stymied, used this internal carnage to its advantage. The relentless pressure and the growing body count, both literal and metaphorical, finally cracked the wall of silence. Henry Hill, a Burke associate who saw the writing on the wall and realized he was on the hit list, made the desperate decision to enter the Federal Witness Protection Program in 1980. His testimony, a cascading torrent of names, dates, and murders, would become the foundation for countless indictments and, eventually, the cultural touchstone of the film Goodfellas. Hill's account painted a vivid picture of the heist and its bloody aftermath, but notably, Marty Krugman remained a spectral, almost pitiful figure in that narrative, the nervous guy who knew too much and was erased. The legal reckoning was complex and partial. Louis Werner, the inside man, was convicted and served 13 years. Jimmy Burke was eventually convicted for the murder of Richard Eaton, another participant in the purge, and for fixing Boston College basketball games. But he was never formally convicted for the Lufthansa heist or for the murder of Marty Krugman. He died in prison of cancer in 1996, having taken the full truth to his grave. The vast majority of the Lufthansa cash was never recovered, fueling endless speculation about its whereabouts, buried, laundered, or slowly spent in a shadow economy. For law enforcement, Lufthansa was a painful but transformative lesson. It exposed critical vulnerabilities in airport security, leading to sweeping reforms in cargo handling and internal vetting procedures. More importantly, it cemented the strategic value of the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, and the Witness Protection Program. The FBI learned that to dismantle such organizations, they needed to attack the structure, not just individual crimes, and to cultivate insiders terrified for their lives. The Krugman case, in particular, became a grim object lesson in the absolute necessity of moving quickly to protect a potential informant before the underworld's internal justice system could act. Yet, for all the legal and procedural shifts, the most enduring impact is cultural. Marty Krugman's story is the dark, necessary counter-narrative to the romanticized vision of the mob. He was no charismatic Henry Hill, no fearsome Jimmy Burke, no shrewd Paul Vario. He was the collateral damage, the expendable civilian who briefly touched the engine of a great crime and was atomized by it. His tale strips away the glamour to reveal the essential truth, that at its core, this world operates on betrayal, paranoia, and the utter annihilation of the weak. In books, documentaries, and films, Krugman is often the footnote, the prologue to the main event, but his arc is in many ways the most morally instructive. He represents every small-time dreamer who thought he could outsmart the system, every person who believed that proximity to power was the same as possessing it. His ghost haunts the legend of Lufthansa, a persistent reminder that the true cost of that mountain of money was measured not in dollars, but in human souls, most of them now nameless and forgotten, dissolved in lime or swallowed by the sea. The heist itself transcended its criminal reality to become a symbol of ultimate ambition and ultimate folly, a perfect crime followed by perfectly chaotic and violent fallout. And at the center of that paradox was the bookmaker from the wig shop, whose only true power was the power to disappear without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that continues to fascinate and horrify, a blank space where a man once was, and where only questions remain. To understand the full, chilling weight of Marty Krugman's fate, one must step away from the broad strokes of the heist and its legendary aftermath and focus on the intimate, human wreckage left in its wake, the silent suffering of those condemned to live in the shadow of a mystery. Francine Krugman, his wife, was thrust into a special kind of purgatory, one defined not by grief that has a conclusion, but by an endless, unresolved searching. One day her husband walked out the door with a flicker of hope in his eyes, and he simply never returned. There was no body to bury, no death certificate to finalize affairs, no grave to visit. There was only the crushing silence of the telephone that never rang, the empty space at the dinner table, and the terrifying visits from both the FBI and, she suspected, men associated with the world that had swallowed him. She was left to raise their daughter alone, trapped in a nightmare of not knowing, a state that psychologists understand is one of the most torturous for the human psyche. Was he alive somewhere, having been forced to flee? Was he suffering? Had he died quickly? The absence of evidence precluded the possibility of closure, locking her in a permanent present tense of dread and speculation. She became a ghost herself, haunted by a phantom. The family's life was frozen in time, their home potentially a crime scene without any proof, their name forever linked to one of the most famous crimes in history, yet utterly powerless to change their narrative. For Krugman's daughter, the loss was a different, deeper kind of theft, the theft of a father, of normalcy, of a past that could never be honestly explained. She grew up in the echo of her father's disappearance, her childhood defined by whispers, by the specter of men in suits asking questions, and by a mother carrying a weight of fear she could never fully articulate. The legacy passed down was not one of notoriety or ill-gotten gains, but of trauma and a fundamental instability in the universe, the understanding that a person could be erased, and that the world could simply move on. This is the true, hidden cost of organized crime, a cost never reflected in the dazzling tallies of stolen cash. It is paid in the quiet bedrooms of ordinary houses, in the anxiety of children, in the lifetimes spent glancing over shoulders, waiting for a resolution that will never come. Beyond the Krugman family, the heist left a landscape of similar voids. The families of Tommy DeSimone, Joe Manry, Robert McMahon, and the other purged crew members faced the same harrowing ambiguity. They, too, were denied the basic human ritual of mourning, left to wonder if their sons, husbands, or fathers were languishing in some distant prison or rotting in a shallow, unmarked grave. The community itself, the neighborhoods of Brooklyn and Queens that bred these men, was infected with a low-grade fever of fear. The boastful, chest-thumping culture that surrounded wise guys in the bars and social clubs was replaced, in the wake of Lufthansa, by a tangible, watchful silence. Trust evaporated. Friendships of decades dissolved overnight as suspicion fell on everyone. The mountain of money had promised a golden age for the crew. Instead, it ushered in a winter of distrust and blood. This atmospheric shift, this chilling of the very air, is perhaps the heist's most profound and overlooked consequence. It demonstrated that the mafia's greatest enemy was not the FBI, but its own insatiable appetite and the paranoid logic it engendered. The Code of Omerta was revealed not as a bond of honor, but as a fragile construct that shattered under the weight of too much temptation. And in the center of this shattered landscape stood the figure of Marty Krugman, the ultimate symbol of that fragility. His story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about justice and narrative. Our society, and our entertainment, often crave resolution. The bad guy caught, the money recovered, the mystery solved. Marty Krugman's case denies us all of that. It offers only the unsettling reality that sometimes, evil is efficient enough to leave no trace, that powerful men can indeed get away with murder, and that the official record can be forced to end with a question mark. His file at the FBI remains open, a monument to institutional frustration. For the detectives and agents who worked the case, Krugman's disappearance is a lifelong itch that can never be scratched, a puzzle with the most important piece forever missing. They know, in their bones, what happened. They can recite the names of the likely perpetrators. They can map out the probable methods. But without a body, without a witness, the law is rendered mute. This is the final, masterful move in Jimmy Burke's criminal chess game. He created a fact pattern that was legally inadmissible, a truth that could not be uttered in a court of law. So, we are left with a ghost story, but one rooted in the gritty, asphalt reality of New York City. Marty Krugman is a whisper in the wind that blows through the marshlands of Jamaica Bay, a face that peers out from behind the wigs in a forgotten storefront photograph, a name on a missing persons report that has yellowed with age. His enduring presence in this story is precisely because of his absence. He is the human sacrifice offered on the altar of American greed, the reminder that behind every legendary score, there are forgotten casualties who paid the ultimate price for a dream that was never theirs to claim. The story of Marty Krugman, therefore, is not merely a cold case from a bygone era of smoke-filled rooms and Cadillac-sized hubcaps. It is a timeless parable about the price of forbidden knowledge and the seductive, fatal allure of a world that promises everything but delivers only oblivion. It forces us to look beyond the cinematic glamour of the heist, past the sharp suits and the witty banter, and into the abyss that lies beneath, an abyss that swallowed a man whole without a ripple. As the years turn into decades, the mystery has only deepened, fossilizing into a legend where facts blend with folklore. Speculation about the fate of the money and the specific details of each disappearance has spawned countless theories. But Krugman's fate remains the starkest, cleanest moral of the story. He was the proof of concept for Jimmy Burke's philosophy, that the only safe secret is one buried with the man who told it. In the grand narrative of American crime, the Lufthansa Heist stands as a peak of ambition. But the story of the bookmaker from Brooklyn is the shadow in that peak's valley, dark, deep, and profoundly human. It is a reminder that history is written not only by the powerful and the victorious, but by the vanished and the silenced. Their stories, though often untold or incomplete, hold an essential truth. Marty Krugman sought entry into a closed society, believing that his intelligence and his information could buy him a ticket. What he purchased instead was a death sentence, paid for with the currency of his own life. His rise was nothing more than a momentary glance from the dragon. His fall was the dragon's breath. And his disappearance is the silence that settled after the fire had burned out. We are left contemplating this silence. It asks us what we value, and what risks we are willing to take for the illusion of belonging and wealth. It asks us to consider the families left behind in the wake of such chaos, their lives forever altered by choices they did not make. It asks us to acknowledge the limits of justice, to sit with the uncomfortable reality that not all puzzles are solved, not all crimes are answered, and not all ghosts are laid to rest. The echo of that single, fateful whisper in the wig shop still reverberates through time, a lesson etched not in stone, but in emptiness. If this journey into the heart of a true crime mystery, this exploration of ambition, paranoia, and a vanishing that defied the FBI, has held you in its grip, then you understand the power of these untold stories from the shadows. The past is filled with such enigmatic figures and unresolved chapters, each a window into the complexities of human nature and the dark corners of history. I am dedicated to bringing these meticulously researched narratives to you, stripping away the myth to reveal the haunting reality beneath. But to continue this mission, to dive into the next forgotten file, the next chilling disappearance, the next legend that history almost forgot, I need your help. So, if you want to be there when the next story is uncovered, please show your support. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell. Your engagement is what allows this searchlight to keep shining into the darkness. It tells the algorithm that these stories matter, that there is an audience for truth, no matter how unsettling. And in the comments below, let me know, what other mysteries from the annals of crime, history, or the unexplained would you want explored in this same deep, narrative style? Your suggestions might just be the starting point for our next investigation. Until then, remember, some secrets are meant to stay buried, but the stories of those they consume deserve to be heard. Thank you for listening.